He walked into the hotel lobby carrying the quiet weight of many years on his shoulders. The place felt calm and distant from the outside world, where noise and urgency ruled every hour of the day. The marble floor reflected the warm light from tall lamps, and the air carried a soft echo of footsteps and muted voices. He did not come with the intention to perform or to be noticed. He simply needed a place to sit and breathe, and let his thoughts settle. Travel had become a habit for him, not out of joy, but out of necessity. He moved from city to city, taking temporary work and sleeping in places that never felt like home. Music was the only constant he carried with him. It lived in his hands and in his memory. And in the quiet spaces between moments when he felt lost, he returned to music without thinking, because it had always been there. The piano in the lobby stood open and polished as if it belonged there naturally. It was not placed in a corner, but right in the heart of the room. Guests passed it without much thought, seeing it as decoration rather than an invitation. He noticed the bench was slightly worn, showing signs that others had sat there before. That small detail made him feel less alone. He hesitated for a brief moment, wondering if it would be inappropriate to sit down. No signs told him not to play, and no one seemed to be watching closely. A few guests sat reading or scrolling on their phones. Staff members moved behind the desk, quietly focused on their tasks. The space felt open and forgiving. He placed his bag near the bench and sat down slowly. The piano keys felt cool under his fingers. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to prepare a performance, but to listen to his own breathing. In that instant, memories came back without effort. Long nights practicing as a child, his mother sitting nearby, pretending to read, while listening carefully. The small apartment filled with sound and hope. His life had taken turns he never expected. Opportunities had slipped away. Choices made under pressure had shaped paths he could not undo. Yet music never judged him. It accepted every emotion and transformed it into sound. He began to play softly. The first notes were simple and unplanned. They were not meant to impress. They were meant to comfort. The sound traveled gently across the lobby, touching the walls and the ceiling. It blended with the space as if it had always been there. A woman near the window paused her reading. A man walking toward the elevator slowed his steps. No one reacted. Suddenly, the music worked quietly, like a conversation between strangers who understood each other without words. His posture remained relaxed. He did not look around. His focus stayed on the keys and the feelings guiding his hands. Each chord carried something honest. There was sadness, but also calm. There was regret, but also acceptance. Time felt different while he played. Minutes passed without him noticing. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Even the background sounds softened, as if the building itself was listening behind him. A woman entered the lobby unnoticed. She was older, with silver hair and careful movements. Her face carried wisdom, shaped by years of experience and loss. She paused. When she heard the music, something in the sound caught her attention immediately. She did not recognize the melody, but she recognized the emotion. It reminded her of moments long gone, of choices made and roads taken. She chose a seat behind the piano. Without making a sound from where she sat, she could see the young man clearly. His face showed deep concentration and quiet vulnerability. She noticed the way his shoulders moved slightly with the rhythm, the way his hands hovered over the keys with respect rather than force. She felt a strange familiarity she could not explain, not recognition of his face, but recognition of his presence. The feeling stirred something heavy and unresolved in her heart. As he continued playing, more people began to gather. They stood at a respectful distance. No phones were raised, no one whispered. It was not that they were instructed to stay silent. It simply felt right to listen. The music grew fuller without becoming loud. Each note flowed into the next naturally. There was no performance energy, only truth, expressed through sound. The woman behind him listened carefully. Her eyes never left his back. She felt tears forming, but she did not wipe them away. She allowed the moment to exist without resistance. The young man had no idea who was sitting behind him. He did not turn around. He did not seek approval. He played as if the world consisted only of him and the piano. A staff member noticed the growing crowd and stopped walking. Guests who had planned to leave delayed their departure. The lobby transformed from a passing space into a shared experience. The woman behind him realized something important. As she listened, the style, the phrasing, the small pauses between chords, they reminded her of someone she once knew very well. Her heart began to race quietly. She leaned forward slightly, afraid that moving too much would break the moment. She needed to be sure. She needed to listen more. The young man shifted into a melody that felt deeply personal. It carried a story of separation and longing. The woman recognized it instantly. It was a piece once played in her home many years ago. Her breath caught. Memories flooded back with clarity. And for a child practicing late into the night, a promise made and later broken, a goodbye that never felt complete. The lobby remained unaware of the silent realization happening behind the piano. They only felt the emotion growing stronger. Something important was unfolding, even if they could not yet name it. The young man finished the piece gently. His hands rested on the keys. The final sound faded naturally into silence. No one clapped, no one spoke. The stillness held more meaning than applause ever could. He opened his eyes slowly, still unaware of the presence behind him. He took a deep breath, preparing to stand and leave as quietly as he arrived. And in that moment, the weight of what was about to be discovered hovered in the air, waiting for the next part of the story. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he slowly lifted his hands from the keys and let them rest on his lap. His shoulders dropped as if he had been carrying a hidden weight, and finally allowed it to fall. The silence that followed was deep and full, not empty. Everyone in the lobby remained still, because no one wanted to be the first to break that fragile moment. He stood up from the bench quietly and reached for his bag. In his mind, the music was finished, and the moment had passed. He believed he would walk away unnoticed, just another traveler stopping briefly in a place that was not his before he could step away. A soft voice spoke from behind him. It was calm and steady yet filled with emotion held carefully. In place, the sound of it made his body freeze without understanding why he turned slowly, not out of fear, but out of instinct. When he faced her, his expression changed instantly. Confusion crossed his face, followed by disbelief, and then something much deeper. The woman stood up with effort, as if her legs were unsure but her heart was certain. She looked at him closely, searching his face, as though confirming a truth she had already accepted. Her eyes shone with tears that reflected both pain and relief. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt heavy with years of absence and unanswered questions. The people watching sensed that something important was happening, even if they did not understand what it was. She said his name quietly, not loudly enough for the room to hear, but clearly enough for him to feel it. The sound of his name from her voice carried the past into the present. His breath caught, and his mouth opened, but no words came out. He had imagined this moment many times in different ways. None of those imagined versions matched the reality standing before him. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, but firm, as if grounding him. It was the same way she used to comfort him when he was younger. He felt a rush of memories flood his mind, moments of laughter, moments of disappointment, moments where silence grew between them instead of understanding. He finally spoke her name softly, saying it felt unfamiliar and yet deeply natural. His voice trembled despite his effort to keep it steady. People in the lobby began to realize that this was not a chance meeting between strangers. This was a reunion shaped by time and distance. No one moved closer. They gave space without being asked. She asked him how he had been. The question sounded simple, but carried years of concern and regret. He answered honestly, without details, saying that life had been difficult but manageable. She nodded as if she had expected that answer. Her eyes never left his face. She said she had listened to him play and knew immediately. She said no one else played like that. He lowered his gaze, feeling both seen and exposed. He admitted that he played to remember and sometimes to forget. He said the piano was the only place where he could speak freely. She listened without interrupting. Her expression showed pride mixed with sadness. She said she had followed his life from a distance. Whenever she could, she said she never stopped caring. Even when silence grew, he felt a mixture of anger and relief rise inside him. He had carried unanswered questions for so long. Seeing her now brought comfort and reopened wounds at the same time. He asked her why she never reached out. The question came out calm but firm. She deep breath before answering. She said she believed giving space was the right choice at the time. She said fear and guilt guided her more than wisdom. She admitted that she had been wrong. The honesty in her voice softened something inside him. He realized that both of them had been shaped by their own mistakes. Neither had been untouched by regret around them. The lobby slowly returned to motion. Some people quietly walked away. Others stayed, pretending to check their phones. While listening closely, she asked if they could sit down and talk. He hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. They moved to a pair of chairs near the piano. Sitting across from her felt strange and familiar. He noticed how much she had aged and how much she was still the same. The lines on her face told stories he had not been there to witness. They spoke about the past, carefully choosing words that would not reopen every wound. She spoke of missed birthdays and distant updates. He spoke of loneliness and learning to stand on his own. At times, silence filled the space between them. This silence was not uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, slowly rebuilding. She told him that hearing him play reminded her of the child who once filled her home with music. She said she never doubted his talent. She only doubted her own decisions. He listened quietly, feeling emotions settle into something calmer. He realized that carrying anger had taken more energy than he wanted to admit. As they talked, the world outside the lobby felt distant and unimportant. Time passed unnoticed. Again, just as it had while he played. This time the stillness came from connection rather than solitude. She asked him where he was going next. He said he did not know yet. He had stopped planning too far ahead. She nodded and said that maybe they could find a way to stay in touch. The suggestion felt tentative and hopeful at the same time. He did not answer immediately. He looked at the piano. Once more he realized that coming into the lobby had changed more than he expected. He finally agreed, not with certainty, but with openness. It was not forgiveness fully formed. It was a beginning. As they stood up together, there was no dramatic gesture, no embrace meant to impress those watching. Just a shared understanding that something important had shifted. The people nearby sensed the quiet resolution. They returned to their own lives, carrying the echo of a moment they would remember. He picked up his bag again, but this time he did not feel the same weight. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while it felt less lonely. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, they left the chairs near the piano and walked slowly toward a quieter corner of the lobby. The space felt different now, as if the air itself had shifted after their conversation. Neither of them rushed, because there was no need to escape the moment. He felt a strange calm settle inside him. For years his life had been defined by movement and avoidance. Now he was standing still in front of the person who shaped his earliest memories. She asked if he was hungry and mentioned a small cafe near the lobby. He agreed, not because of hunger, but because continuing the moment felt important. They walked side by side, without touching, yet aware of each other in a new way. As they sat at a small table, the noise of cups and quiet conversations surrounded them. The normal sounds of life returned, gently reminding them that the world kept moving. Still their focus remained on each other. She watched him carefully as he spoke. Every expression, every pause felt meaningful to her. She noticed the way he chose his words, thoughtfully shaped by years of speaking only when necessary. He told her about the cities he had lived in, about rooms rented for short stays, about nights where music was the only company he trusted. She listened closely and did not interrupt. She wanted to understand, not to explain herself. She realized how much of his life had passed without her presence. When she spoke, she shared pieces of her own life, moments of pride mixed with regret days. When she wondered where he was and whether he was safe, he asked questions he had held inside for years, not with anger, but with curiosity. He wanted to understand her choices rather than judge them. She answered honestly even when the truth was uncomfortable. She admitted that fear had guided her decisions more than love. She admitted that she thought distance would protect both of them. Hearing this did not erase the past, but it softened the sharp edges of his memories. He realized that pain often came from misunderstanding rather than intention. They spoke about music and how it had shaped his identity. She smiled when he described losing himself in sound. She said she always believed music would be his language when words failed. He asked her if she remembered the first song he ever played. Her eyes lit up as she recalled the moment clearly. She described a small living room and a simple melody repeated again and again. The memory brought warmth to both of them. It reminded them of a time when hope felt simple and close. For a moment, the years between them seemed smaller. As the conversation continued, people around them changed. New guests arrived, others left with luggage in hand. Yet the two of them remained anchored in their shared space. He noticed how easily time passed when he was no longer guarding himself. He did not feel the need to perform or hide. He felt accepted as he was in that moment. She told him she had come to the hotel for a conference, that her stay was short. The knowledge added urgency. Without panic, he felt a quiet pressure, knowing this window of connection might be brief. Yet he reminded himself that beginnings did not need to be perfect, they only needed honesty. She asked if he would play again someday for her, not in a lobby, not for strangers, just for the two of them. The request caught him off guard. Music had always been something he shared with distance. The idea of playing for her felt intimate and vulnerable. He did not answer right away. He considered what it would mean to open that part of himself. Then he nodded slowly. Her smile held gratitude and patience. She understood that trust returned gradually. She was willing to wait. As they stood to leave the cafe area, he noticed how different he felt walking beside her. The familiar ache in his chest had softened. It was still there, but less heavy. They returned briefly to the piano. The lobby was busier now, and the quiet magic had faded, yet the instrument still stood as a witness to what had happened. He touched the edge of the piano lightly. Not to play, but to acknowledge it. The piano had been the bridge between past and present. She watched him with a gentle expression. She understood that this moment would stay with him long after they parted, just as it would stay with her. They exchanged contact information without ceremony, a simple act that carried great meaning. It represented a choice to remain connected as they prepared to go their separate ways. There was no dramatic goodbye, just a shared look filled with understanding. They both knew this was not an ending. He walked toward the exit feeling lighter than he had in years. The world outside waited with its usual uncertainty, but now he carried something new. She watched him leave with a quiet sense of peace. She knew rebuilding would take time, but the first step had been taken. The lobby returned fully to its everyday rhythm. Most people would never know what had happened there, but for the two of them, everything had changed. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, in the days that followed, he found himself thinking often about the meeting in the lobby. The memory returned at unexpected times, while walking through streets or sitting alone at night. He noticed how the weight he once carried felt different now, not gone, but easier to hold. He continued traveling as he always had, moving between cities with his small bag and quiet routine. Yet something inside him had shifted. The sense of running without direction had softened into movement with awareness. He replayed the conversation in his mind, not searching for mistakes, but understanding its meaning. For the first time in years, the past felt less like an open wound and more like a story still being written. He realized that unresolved moments did not disappear on their own. They waited patiently. Music took on a new tone for him when he played. Now the notes carried both pain and hope. There was space in the melodies where anger once lived. In its place was reflection. He found himself staying longer in certain places. He accepted small local performances. He played in cafes, community halls, and quiet corners where people listened without expectation. Each time he sat at a piano, he felt the connection to his past and present meeting again. He no longer played only to escape. He played to express and sometimes to remember. Meanwhile, she returned to her own life, carrying the meeting close to her heart. She spoke of it to no one. Some moments felt too personal to share. She reflected deeply on the choices she had made years ago. For a long time, she had convinced herself that distance was kindness. Now she understood that absence can create pain even when intentions are good. She began writing letters to him, not to send, but to understand her own thoughts. In those letters, she spoke honestly about fear, pride, and regret. The process allowed her to see herself clearly without excuses. Eventually, she gathered the courage to send a message. It was simple and direct. She asked how he was and thanked him again for the music. When he received it, he did not feel pressure, only warmth. He replied in the same tone, open and honest. Their messages were not frequent. They did not rush to fill the silence. They allowed space for their lives to continue, while keeping the connection alive. As weeks passed, trust began to grow slowly. They shared small details of daily life, moments that might seem ordinary but carried meaning. He shared photos of streets he walked and places he played. She shared thoughts about her work and memories from the past. Each exchange built understanding. He noticed that anger no longer surfaced when her name appeared on his phone. Instead, there was curiosity, a willingness to learn who she was now. She noticed that she no longer felt afraid of saying the wrong thing. She trusted that honesty mattered more than perfection. They were both learning. One evening, he found himself playing a piece he had not touched in years. It was the same melody that had triggered her recognition in the lobby. This time it felt different. The music no longer carried only loss. It carried resilience. It told a story Survival and quiet strength. He recorded a short portion and sent it to her. No explanation, just sound. When she listened, she closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. Tears came, but they were not painful, they were released. She replied, thanking him and telling him she felt proud. The word held power. It landed gently and stayed. He realized that hearing pride from her mattered more than he expected. It filled a space he had long believed would remain empty. He allowed himself to accept it. As months passed, they spoke more openly about the future, not with promises, but with possibility. They discussed visiting the same city someday. The idea did not feel forced. It felt natural, like a continuation rather than a correction. He began to plan less as an escape and more as a choice. Travel still mattered, but so did connection. He learned that independence did not require isolation. She learned that caring did not mean controlling. She allowed him to lead the pace. She respected his boundaries. Relationship did not resemble a traditional reunion. It was something quieter and more honest, built on shared experience rather than expectation. He noticed changes in himself. He slept better. He smiled more easily. Music flowed without resistance. She noticed changes too. She felt lighter, more present, less burdened by what could not be changed. The lobby where they met became a symbol rather than a place, a reminder that unexpected moments can shift the course of a life without drama, without force. Neither of them believed everything was fixed. They understood healing was a process, but they trusted it was happening. The music continued to guide them, not as a solution, but as a language, one that allowed truth without conflict. They both knew that the journey ahead would require patience, but for the first time they felt willing to walk it together, not bound by the past, but informed by it. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As time continued to move forward, he felt more grounded than he had in many years. The connection that had been reopened no longer felt fragile. It felt steady even when there were days without messages or calls. He noticed how his daily habits slowly changed. He woke earlier. He practiced with intention rather than distraction. Music became less about survival and more about communication. He began accepting invitations to play in places that mattered to him, small halls, local gathering spaces, where people came to listen rather than pass through. Each performance felt honest and calm. During one performance, he realized he was no longer playing only for himself. He imagined her listening somewhere else, not physically present, but emotionally connected. That thought gave the music a deeper warmth. She followed his journey quietly. She searched for his performances when he shared locations. Sometimes she listened through recordings. Sometimes she simply imagined the sound. She respected the distance. She did not try to control the pace. She understood that healing grew best when not forced. Their conversations deepened naturally. They spoke about values, about mistakes, about forgiveness, not as an act, but as a process. He shared stories from his childhood that he had never spoken aloud, moments of joy, moments of confusion, moments when he felt unseen. She listened without defending herself. She acknowledged where she had failed. She accepted responsibility without asking for immediate absolution. This honesty strengthened what they were building. Trust grew because nothing was hidden. Even discomfort was allowed to exist. One evening, he told her about a moment when he almost gave up music, a time when rejection felt endless, a time when silence felt safer than hope. She responded by sharing her own lowest moment, a time when she realized that protecting herself had cost her something precious. That realization had stayed with her ever since. Through these exchanges, they began to see each other fully, not as roles from the past, but as people shaped by experience. Eventually, they agreed to meet again, not in a dramatic setting, just a simple city. They both could reach. The decision felt calm. There was no pressure to define what the meeting meant, only a desire to continue the conversation face to face. When the day came, he felt nervous, but not afraid. He reminded himself that whatever happened, he had already gained clarity. Nothing could undo that. She arrived first and waited quietly. When he walked in, she stood and smiled. The moment felt natural, no shock, no distance. They spent the day walking and talking, sharing meals, listening to street music, letting silence exist when words were not needed. At one point, they passed a small music shop. He paused and looked inside. She noticed and suggested they go in. Inside, he played an old piano quietly, not for an audience, just for the space, just for her. The sound was gentle and reflective. It carried gratitude rather than longing. She listened with tears that came easily and left peacefully. That moment felt like closure and beginning combined, not an ending of pain, but an acceptance of it. As evening came, they sat together watching the city lights change. They spoke about the future in simple terms, staying connected, being honest, allowing life to unfold. He realized that reconciliation did not mean returning to what once was. It meant creating something new with awareness, something healthier. She realized that love expressed late was still meaningful. It did not erase time, but it honored it. When they parted, there was no sadness, only trust. They knew they would see each other. He returned to his travels with renewed purpose. Music followed him as always, but now it carried balance. She returned to her life with peace. The past no longer felt unfinished. It felt acknowledged. The world continued as it always had, busy, uncertain, unpredictable. But for them, something essential had settled, a truth accepted, a bond reshaped. And through it all, music remained not as an escape, but as a bridge between who they were and who they were becoming. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, life began to feel fuller in ways he had not expected. The sense of constant movement no longer came from avoidance. It came from choice and curiosity. He noticed how people responded differently to his music now, not because his skill had suddenly changed, but because his presence had. When he sat at a piano, his posture was calmer, his hands moved with confidence rather than urgency. Listeners felt that shift even if they could not explain it. He started receiving invitations that felt more intentional, small festivals, community events, private gatherings, where people valued meaning over noise. At each place, he met individuals who shared their own stories. After hearing him play stories of loss, stories of reconciliation, stories of moments that changed everything unexpectedly, he listened with openness. He understood now that music often unlocked truths people kept hidden, just as it had unlocked his own. She continued to be part of his life in a steady, quiet way. They spoke regularly, but without pressure. Some days they shared long conversations, other days a simple message was enough. She supported his growth without trying to guide it. She learned to trust his instincts. That trust strengthened their bond more than constant reassurance ever could. At times old memories resurfaced. Moments of pain did not disappear completely, but they no longer controlled his reactions. When difficult emotions arose, he did not push them away. He acknowledged them and allowed them to pass. Music helped him process without being overwhelmed. She also faced moments of reflection, situations where she recognized patterns from the past. This time she chose differently. She practiced speaking honestly even when it felt uncomfortable. She practiced listening without interrupting or explaining. These changes affected not only her relationship with him, but with others as well. They both understood that growth did not happen in isolation. It spread outward, influencing every connection. One evening he played in a small hall filled with warm light. The audience sat close enough to feel each breath between notes. The room felt intimate and grounded. As he played, he felt gratitude rather than longing. He was not trying to prove anything, he was simply sharing. After the performance, someone asked what had changed in his music. He thought for a moment before answering. He said he had learned to listen. That answer surprised even him. It felt true. Listening had changed how he played, how he spoke, how he lived. She attended one of his performances quietly, sitting in the back. He did not announce her presence. He did not need to. Their eyes met briefly. The connection was silent and complete. Afterward, they walked together. Without discussing the music, they spoke instead about ordinary things: dinner plans, travel schedules, small details that made life feel real. This normalcy felt like a gift. It showed how far they had come. He realized that reconciliation was not a single moment. It was a series of choices made consistently, often. Quietly, she realized that being present mattered more than being perfect. She allowed herself grace alongside responsibility. They talked openly about boundaries, about independence, about respect. Neither wanted to recreate the past, they wanted to honor it without being defined by it. As seasons changed, he noticed stability forming in his life, not a rigid structure, but a reliable rhythm. Music remained central, but it no longer stood alone. Connection, understanding, purpose, these joined it. He began mentoring younger musicians, informally sharing lessons, beyond technique, lessons about patience and self-trust. He saw parts of himself in them, the uncertainty, the hope. He encouraged them to listen to their emotions, rather than suppress them, to use music as expression rather than escape. She watched this part of his life with quiet pride. She recognized the strength it took to turn pain into guidance. Together they reflected on how far they had come from that first moment in the lobby, a chance meeting, a shared silence, a beginning disguised as coincidence. They did not romanticize it. They respected its simplicity. That moment had opened a door walking through. It had required courage from both of them. They knew challenges would continue to appear. Life did not promise ease, but it offered growth, and they were no longer afraid of that. Music continued to be the thread connecting everything, not as a solution, but as a companion, a reminder that expression could heal, that listening could transform, that presence could rebuild what time had worn down. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the years moved forward, the changes in his life became more visible. What once felt like survival slowly turned into stability, not a loud or dramatic stability, but a quiet, dependable one. He began staying longer in certain cities, not because he was stuck, but because he chose to remain. He formed routines that supported his creativity and well-being: morning walks, regular practice, moments of rest without guilt. Music continued to open doors, not just professional ones, but personal ones as well. People invited him into their lives, into their stories, into moments that mattered. He learned how to say yes without losing himself, and how to say no without fear. This balance gave him confidence he never had before. She remained present through all of it, not watching from a distance anymore, but walking alongside him in a way that respected who he had become. They visited each other when schedules allowed, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for longer stretches. Each visit felt natural. They no longer measured progress by emotional milestones. They measured it by comfort, by how easy it felt to sit in silence together, by how freely they could disagree without retreating. There were moments when old wounds surfaced unexpectedly. A comment, a memory, a familiar feeling. When this happened, they addressed it directly. They talked through discomfort instead of avoiding it. This approach did not erase pain instantly, but it prevented it from growing. Quietly, he noticed that his music reflected this honesty. The compositions were simpler yet deeper, less about technical display, more about clarity. Audiences responded strongly, not with loud reactions, but with attention, with stillness, with presence. After performances, people often said they felt understood. He realized that when he stopped hiding his own truth, others felt safer sharing theirs. She attended many of these performances, sometimes sitting close, sometimes blending into the crowd, always supportive. Their connection no longer needed constant reassurance. It was built into daily life, into shared decisions, into mutual respect. At one point, he considered settling in one place more permanently. The idea no longer felt like surrender, it felt like grounding. They discussed this possibility openly, without pressure, without expectation. She encouraged him to choose what felt right. He appreciated that freedom. It allowed him to imagine a future shaped by intention rather than reaction. Eventually, He chose a city that felt balanced, a place with creative energy and quiet spaces. He found a small apartment filled with light, setting up his piano. There felt symbolic. It was the first time in years he placed it with the intention of staying. She visited, often helping him adjust, sharing meals, laughing over small imperfections. Their relationship continued to evolve, not as something defined by the past, but as something living in the present. They celebrated milestones, quiet successful performance, a personal breakthrough, a difficult conversation handled well. He noticed that happiness no longer felt fleeting, it felt sustainable even on ordinary days. She noticed that regret no longer dominated her thoughts, responsibility remained. But it no longer crushed her. Together, they had learned that healing was not about forgetting, it was about integrating the past into a healthier present. They spoke sometimes about the lobby where everything shifted, not with nostalgia, but with gratitude. That moment had not solved anything by itself. It had simply opened a door. What mattered was the choice they made to walk through it, to keep walking even when it felt uncomfortable. He continued mentoring others, sharing not only musical guidance, but life perspective. He encouraged patience, reflection, honesty. She supported these efforts, seeing how his experiences now helped others find their footing. They understood that their story was not extraordinary because of coincidence, it was meaningful. Because of commitment to listen, to grow, to remain present. As time passed, the emotional intensity of their early reunions softened into trust. Trust became the foundation. They no longer needed to prove anything to each other, they simply showed up. Music remained central. But it was no longer the only voice in his life. Connection had joined it. He felt complete in a way he never expected, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing essential was missing. She felt the same, a sense of alignment, a peace earned through honesty. They looked toward the future with realism and hope, knowing challenges would come, but confident they could face them together. The story that began with a solitary piano in a lobby had grown into something deeper, not a performance, but a life reshaped. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. In time, the story settled into something steady and quietly meaningful. There was no final dramatic moment that defined the ending. Instead, there was a series of ordinary days that proved how much had changed. He woke each morning in his apartment to soft light and familiar sounds. The piano stood near the window, not as an escape, but as a companion. He played daily, sometimes with intention, sometimes just to feel the keys beneath his hands. Music no longer carried the weight of unresolved pain. It carried presence. It reflected a life that felt lived rather than avoided. She became part of his daily rhythm, not always physically present, but emotionally connected. They shared thoughts, plans, and reflections without urgency. Their conversations no longer revolved around what went wrong in the past. They focused on what felt right in the present. They allowed memories to exist without letting them lead. When challenges appeared, they faced them directly. They had learned that silence no longer protected anything. Honest words spoken calmly held more power than avoidance. Ever did he continue to perform, but with a different purpose. He chose venues that valued connection, spaces where people came to listen, not to consume. After some performances, listeners approached him quietly. They shared how the music reminded them of moments in their own lives, moments of reconciliation, moments of loss, moments of hope. He listened carefully. He understood now that music was a meeting place, a space where people felt seen without explanation. She watched these interactions with quiet pride. She saw how his journey now helped others feel less alone. She knew that pain once carried alone had transformed into empathy. Their relationship did not fit into simple labels. It was shaped by time, honesty, and shared growth. It did not need definition to feel real. They supported each other through changes, career shifts, health concerns, unexpected turns that life offered without warning. Through it all, they maintained respect. They spoke openly. They listened fully. The lessons they learned extended beyond their relationship. They influenced friendships, work, everyday interactions. He noticed how easily he connected people now, without fear, without performance, just presence. She noticed how her own relationships deepened as she practiced listening rather than assuming, as she allowed vulnerability without guilt. They often reflected on how a single moment had shifted everything, not because it was extraordinary, but because they chose to respond to it differently. The lobby piano had been an invitation not to perform, but to feel. Accepting that invitation changed the direction of both their lives. Years later, when he played that same melody that once filled the lobby, it sounded different, not softer, not louder, just whole. The music carried acceptance. It told a story without conflict, a story of becoming. Sometimes they spoke about the possibility of writing their story down, not for recognition, but as a reminder of what listening could achieve. They decided against it. They felt the story lived best in how they continued to show up. He taught younger musicians not only how to play, but how to live with awareness. He reminded them that technique mattered less than truth. She continued her own work with renewed clarity. She carried the understanding that presence mattered more than control. Together, they built a life that felt aligned, not perfect, but honest. They celebrated small moments, shared meals, quiet evenings, conversations that wandered without needing resolution. When disagreements arose, they faced them with patience. They understood that conflict did not mean failure. It meant engagement. The future no longer felt like something to fear or chase. It felt like something to participate in. They carried gratitude for what had been lost, because it taught them what mattered. They carried gratitude for what was found, because it was earned. The story that began with one person playing piano alone ended not with applause, but with understanding. It proved that healing did not require dramatic gestures, only willingness, presence. In time, the lobby returned to being just a lobby. The piano returned to being just a piano, but for them it would always represent the moment they chose to listen. And by listening they changed everything. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.